Can't talk with gum in my mouth. Sorry about that. All right, good evening, good afternoon, whichever it is. My name is Aaron. I am the son of Edward. Kind of sounds like I'm starting off the Bible there, son of Aaron, begat this. But let's talk about Ed for a little bit here. Most of you know him as Ed. Some as Eddie. Some of you know him as Henri. All of you knew him as a hard worker. He was a truck driver, a farmer, a trout farmer, all of his life. As he would say, all of those were on his resume. He was always ready to help build, sometimes break something in the process, and then rebuild it. You most likely knew him as a good-natured man who was always happy to see you, and as someone who was a devoted husband, as a man of unwavering faith. All of these things were true. A little bit of the background and the side stuff is that, he liked John Wayne movies, nature documentaries, he loved trains, trucks. If you can't tell, he was a truck driver. He also loved the Mormon Tabernacle every winter, every Christmas, I should say. As many of you know, he loved to tell stories. So that's how we're going to view this today. He was always quite the storyteller. There's a movie called Big Fish that's always reminded me, the main character has always reminded me of my father. He's somebody who just tells stories to his son. And the story essentially is that he's passing away. And he wants to tell his son the story of basically how he came to be. The son is stubborn-headed, but eventually relents and sees the good nature and the heart of his father. My father also loved Paul Harvey, and after every single sign-off for Paul Harvey, he would say, "And now you know the rest of the story. Good day." My father loved stories. That's the one reoccurring theme we'll see here today. He was one of the last great orators. I mean, to him, life was a story that he was meant to tell. Today, it's my honor to put into my own 2 cents and get the last word in. Today, I will try to do my best to give his story some justice. So, right now, if my history is off, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If he would tell a story, but you wouldn't know who was in it sometimes. You'd just be like, and then Bob over there, I didn't know Bob was part of this. Anyways, Edward Hugh Williams was born on August the 9th, 1935, proudly to Jessie, his mother, and Johnny, his father, also a farmer, also a truck driver, in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Born on the tail end of the Dust Bowl, growing up in the rippling effects of the Great Depression, at a time when the world was ill at ease at war, in the shadow of another world war, he took his first steps in the red soil of Pueblo County, Colorado. Ed was one of 9 surviving children, his eldest sibling passing away at just 7 years old before Ed even met him. 9 total in the Williams clan, 7 brothers, 3 sisters. Know what you had to do to pass the time back then. Ed began driving a truck for his father at the age of 13 years old. This is something he told me often. He never graduated high school. He was always pulled out of school to help on the farm, help drive something. His father wasn't the most encouraging. When Ed used to tell me stories of his days growing up, especially for school, I always sensed that there was an area that was still his entire life removed, completely raw for him. My father, as it would turn out, had a learning disability and he was dyslexic. Being at the time in our history, he wasn't treated extremely kindly, and it was a source of great shame for him. But I personally viewed it as one of great strength. He had to navigate the world around him, unsure of what he was doing exactly. He was a truck driver that couldn't read the street signs, but he made every delivery across this country. He defied the odds from the start. Years and years later, when I was in kindergarten, he would sit me down for hours and have me begin to read to him out loud. every day after school for about an hour. It's without a doubt that I credit to him that I'm able to put together any type of a sentence. While many still were hammering out the whole alphabet, he was having me read sports columns for the Phoenix Suns and the Denver Broncos in the Arizona Republic. I would read to him out loud Hardy Boys, Huck Finn, the Boxcar Children. My father would walk around the house doing chores, and if I stopped, you could count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And like clockwork I'd hear, "Hey, you rotten kid! Don't make me come in there!" Sometimes I would try to skip a few pages, and he would have me restart the entire book. He had a saying, though: if you're going to do something, the church version of this is, don't do it with half the cheek, use both. But again, he was a truck driver for 50 years. Years ago, Ed was married to a woman named Velma. Together, they had one son, Lynn. Lynn means the world to my father. I think with Lynn, Ed saw the best possible version of himself. Lynn, like my father, is incredibly intelligent. Seeing them both together is like staring at a carbon copy. With the only difference being that Lynn's maybe a little bit more leaner. He has a mustache. And that's about it. He might be a little bit taller in stature. But they're almost carbon copies of each other. Eventually, though, Velma and Ed divorced. He was dedicated to what he was doing. His job was his passion. As I understood it, she was a school teacher in New Mexico, and he hated it in New Mexico, as any Colorado would tell you. New Mexico is like Arizona without the civilization, and he understood that well. But Lynn was his pride and joy, his greatest singular accomplishment until marrying my mother. My father had a flair for life that was unlike any other I've ever encountered. He wouldn't think twice about hopping in a semi with Butch Early and heading to the Springs to help load up with the cattle. He would travel with people from this very church to Coos Bay, Oregon, because why wouldn't? Did you need a shotgun rider for no reason out to the middle of nowhere in Los Angeles? Saddle up and ride, because he was right there with you. No soldiers left behind. He was everyone's greatest advocate. No matter what, if he believed and when he believed in you, he would swing twice as hard for those who didn't have the strength to fight. There might have been an incident. If you look over here, there's a grenade. There might have been an incident regarding something like that. If you want to know more about it, we can talk about it after this. But my father, above all advocates, would fight harder for my mother than anyone else. He fought harder for her than he did his next breath. Even when he wasn't at home, he would take extended trips out to Colorado with his family in the summer months. He would always be her biggest advocate. The sun's own life-sustaining radiation was but a mere flicker of light compared to the empyreal splendor that was present in my father's eyes every time she entered the room. They met at a truck stop diner in Colorado Springs. At this point, Ed was actually retired due to a horrific accident that happened around 1979, 1980. He had a 2-ton load of pipe fall on him. He'd become disabled from the one passion that he had his entire career. It crushed his leg. He spent around a year in the hospital. His own mother fought every single day to ensure that his leg wasn't amputated. Most of you at one point might have seen him with a cane, and this is why. To diverge for 1 second during this time, my father rebuilt his '69 Chevy pickup. He converted it from stick shift to an automatic, being unable to read the manual that came with it. He didn't feel that the engine was strong enough, so he replaced it with a Camaro engine. He did all of this despite not being able to really even walk, let alone being able to do anything in terms of reading what was in front of him. He also converted the gun rack to his cane holder, and I think that was pretty fun. But my mother, Brenda, caught his eye immediately. She was a waitress at the big train. He, his rowdy brothers, and a cast of friends would come in and get coffee to warm up in the morning before they went to go raise hell throughout the day and night. Brenda was a single mother at this point. It started off innocently enough. He'd harass her a bit at work. She'd give it right back to him. Ed had this mischievous streak in him that was so deeply ingrained into his being and his soul that it went deep into the marrow of his bones, into the strands of his very DNA. He loved to joke, to laugh, to poke, prod, and needle, to see exactly how much he could get away with, and then back off. He also had a type of charisma about him that gave him the ability to get out of almost any situation just because he could. It wasn't just my mother either. In that back corner over there, you've dealt with this, Pastor Mummy dealt with this. Rest in peace. Leroy Van Verth also dealt with this as well. We would sit back there, we would cause a lot of mischief in that back corner where you're sitting at. He understood more than most others that humor grows our relationships, and with my mother, it exposed a soulmate and a love that finally completed it. One of the most encapsulating and defining moments of character, my dad offered to babysit for my mother. My mother, until Ed came along, was almost completely alone in raising me. They were meant to love each other. Singularly, they were broken, but together they were strong, healthy, and whole. My father proposed to my mother in a Christmas card. He struggled greatly with writing, but to me, this signified his determination and his dedication to her. No matter how difficult things were, there's always a way. They had a secret/surprise wedding. August 27th, 1988, they decided to move to Eloy, Arizona. My mother might not believe this, but this is my first memory. Albeit I was only 3 years old, I distinctly remember my uncle holding me and everyone being very excited. They were having a picnic. They had packed everything they owned into his car and their old Winnebago. During the picnic, when their friends and family were preoccupied, they snuck off separately, changed into their finest. Though one family member did catch on moments before it happened, most were none the wiser until the pastor was walking down the aisle. You might notice that I interchange Ed and my father a lot between us. That's because he adopted me when I was 5 years old. At that point, I'd always called him Ed, and it's a force of habit, not a sign of disrespect. This man, no matter how much anyone knew him, was my father. My biological father never wanted anything to do with me. Ed took me as his own, well after he'd already raised his own flesh and blood. We never had much, but witnessing Ed from my own eyes, I can tell you that anything is possible. Never listen to the odds, because the odds still say that there's always a chance, no matter how 1 in a million that it could be your turn. He used to quote Johnny Cash and say, "How do you get a Cadillac? One piece at a time." My father was extremely resourceful. Duct tape was a paintbrush, and his entire gamut was domestic repair was his canvas. That meant that he thought outside of the box for everything. For example, when he was teaching me how to play basketball, instead of properly blocking a shot, he would take his cane and knock it out of the air. It's not fair. It's not fair. In a twofold strike of resourcefulness, I didn't think about this until the other day when I drove my wife Samantha here over to the community center down the road, the senior center. They used to have a pool there, and with that pool, all the kids would come over to our house afterwards. They would eat up all our food, eat up all our snacks. So my father got tired of it and put an anti-assault whistle on our outside refrigerator. So if you opened it, a rape whistle.
Wow.
But the other thing is that he saw money with this, and he turned around and sold soda, hot dogs, chips at the senior center and raised quite a bit of money. He was devastatingly resourceful. He even helped me one time with this issue I had. I used to leave my key accidentally, my house key, at home all the time. And he was so great helping me. One time I left it at home, and my way to get back in the house was I would just take off my back window screen. And I would climb in through the screen and go put it back on in the morning. He helped me one day by putting roughly 136 screws into it so it would never come off again. I don't think I forgot my key after that. In August of 2007, I lived in an apartment with a friend of mine in Albany, New York. I called my father and we had a pretty typical conversation at first. I updated him about how my life was, how work was. I hadn't really lived there very long, and I was discovering an entirely new world, so I loved to share my adventures with him. I was walking just outside in Washington Park, and it had started to rain. Hey, bud, I got something to tell you. He told me that he was diagnosed with cancer. But he was going to fight this. Don't worry about it. You only get yourself sick, he would tell me. And he wasn't wrong. Shortly afterwards, I moved back to Arizona. I remember how much the treatments affected him back then. I remember him sitting in his chair with the air conditioning on full blast, fans on him, in his underwear at 2 in the morning, drenched in sweat. His spirit never broke. I also remember that day when he went into remission and how he became a survivor. Any doubts that I had about him being Superman were completely extinguished. I also remember the call that I got when he told me that he came back in 2012. I also remember the call that I got last year when they told me that his cancer metastasized and become very aggressive. But his spirit never broke. He never stopped laughing or joking. On September the 22nd was one of the happiest days of my life in 2017. It was the day that my wife and I got married in a small town really not that different from this one, way up in the North Country in Minnesota on a farm in Effie. The sign reads population 123, and they also have a statue of a mosquito. But logistics aside, my mother and my father were able to attend our wedding. Despite his declining health, he showed up. My wife and I discovered a few months prior that when you apply for a marriage license, both parties are allowed to legally change their names. So I toyed with the idea of finally living the dream and becoming Aaron Darth Vader, legally, the way that it was meant to be. However, I took a different route, and I changed my middle name from Earl to Ed. After the wedding, we had this amazing party down the road, and my father gave a speech using a rope and how it binds us together no matter which way you tug. The goal is still the same, to hold tightly. It was then that I got to tell him what we'd done. I had no idea how he'd react. Edward was always, almost to a fault, humble. And I honestly thought that he might be embarrassed that I would go that direction. But this was one of the very few times in my life that I ever witnessed him cry. I never shared blood with Edward Hugh Williams, but I do have a lifetime worth of memories. 34 years. And to be honest, the past in what feels like the blink of an eye. I've caught myself having adopted many of his mannerisms subconsciously. We clear our throats the same. We have the same sense of humor, the same sense of adventure and curiosity. And that's indicative of Ed as a whole. This very church will carry his memory for the rest of the time that it stands. There isn't much that's been built around here that he didn't have a hand in. On December the 17th, 2019, his body riddled with metastatic disease, and his systems failed. His body wrought with unending pain. My father drew his final breath, and he was called home to tell the story to a new audience. But his story here does not end. His type of cancer has a 20% survival rate within the first year. After that, it drops drastically to 7% for 5 years. I couldn't find any statistics for survival after that. My father was diagnosed in 2007 and finally succumbed in 2019. That means is until the very end, my father defied the odds. So like Jeff said, this isn't a funeral. And honestly, no disrespect, this isn't even a celebration of life. This is a testament to the human spirit. And if anything, my father is one of a story of revival. Cancer did not win this battle. If anything, you could call it a draw, but I even disagree. Because like I mentioned, Ed was also sneakier than he let on. My father was never the hero of his own stories. The focus was always on everyone else. He was always happy to be the supporting character. So on December the 17th in 2019, my father, Edward Hugh Williams' story just began. Shortly after exiting his mortal plane, casting aside the shackles of earthly pain, and walking triumphantly home, my father's final act was to donate his body to science, in hopes that somewhere in his body resides the key to unlocking the devastating chokehold that cancer gives every person it encounters. It was his hope that one day a cancer diagnosis is no longer a death sentence, but rather something remedied not unlike the common cold. The bigger picture here is that one day he hoped his pain would give someone else the hope to continue to witness their own future, free from the burden of excruciating uncertainty. It was my father's final wish to give another person hope. And like I said, he was never the hero of his own stories. But this is his story to tell. He was the hero of my stories, and one day he's going to be the silent hero of someone else's. And Edward Hugh Williams wouldn't have it any other way. And now you know the rest of the story. Good day.